Worrell, City Council for District 4. I am the chair of the Boston City Council Committee on Ways and Means. Today is Monday, February 12, 2024, and this meeting is meant to be an opportunity to discuss the Council's RFI, Request for Information for Boston Public Schools, in advance of the FY25 budget review process. In accordance with Chapter 2 of the Acts of 2023, modifying certain requirements of the open meeting law and relieving public bodies of certain requirements, including the requirement that public bodies conduct its meeting in a public place that is open and physically accessible to the public. The City Council will be conducting this meeting in person in the Ionella Chamber, and it is being recorded. The public may watch this meeting via live stream at www.boston.gov/city-council-tv and on Xfinity 8/RCN 82/FiOS 964. It will also be rebroadcasted at a later date. I am joined by my colleagues, the Vice Chair of the Committee, Councilor Pepin, Councilor Murphy, Councilor Weber, Councilor Braden, Councilor Coletta, Councilor Flynn, Councilor Louis Jen, and Councilor Santana. I just wanted to start by explaining a bit about what we're doing today. We're meeting to discuss the request for information that we will be submitting to the Boston Public Schools as it relates to the budget they released on Wednesday at the school committee meeting. When the public is invited to this meeting and can watch us deliberate, this isn't a hearing. Hearings related to the budget will be open to public testimony, will occur at a later date. We're holding this RFI meeting earlier than usual in an attempt to engage in the budgetary process before the school committee approves the budget during the last week of March. Once that budget is approved by the school committee, the City Council is limited with changes that can be made, unlike our authority with the rest of the budget, which will be released on April 10th. For that reason, we are working with the BPS earlier than usual, and a budget team from BPS will also be holding a working session in mid-March so that the council members can advocate for any changes to that budget. For some context on the overall budget process, each year during the budget, the administration provides the council with several resources for our review. The dockets with departmental appropriation numbers and the budget books which break down departmental appropriations into categories like personnel, non-personnel, and by program, name, or subdivision. It also provides information on external funds and planned capital projects. This information, limited to brief descriptions, did not paint a full picture of departments' use of their budget. For this reason, the chair of the Committee on Ways and Means typically sends the Budget Office a general request for information, which enables the committee to get additional information from departments submitted to the Council before a department's hearing. For clarification, this RFI is meant to be generally applicable to all departments. The opportunity for specific departmental questions is during the scheduled review hearings. You should all have a copy of last year's RFI. At this point, I'll turn it over to my colleagues in order of arrival for their thoughts or suggestions relating to the RFI. So we'll just be taking any thoughts, questions that we want to be added to the RFIs. So with that, I'll turn it over to Councilor Pepin.
Thank you, Councilor Worrell. Thank you so much for everyone who's here today. I just had a clarifying question that I wanted to go on record. If we could just define what is weighted student funding. Just want to make sure that I have my definition correct, and how are we going to now figure out how much money is going into the budget? That's my official question.
Thank you, Councilor Pepin. The question will be added. Now we'll go to Councilor Murphy.
Thank you, Chair. Clarifying question. I know this is the first of many conversations, but how long do we as a council have to submit questions through you, the chair?
We're going to open this up because we want to receive the questions a week in advance, hopefully, because typically in the past, we received it right before a hearing, and that's too short of a time period. So hopefully we'll get it a week before the March 14th.
And obviously, the hope is that when BPS comes to sit here for that meeting, that they actually have answers. It doesn't mean those are the only questions we can ask, but it is meaning that we can give them a heads up on some of the
Absolutely.
questions to make sure we have good answers. So thank you for that. I have lots of questions. The big glaring one is that we went from 1.4 billion to 1.53 billion, even though we continue to lose students. We're, over the last 4 school years now, we're at about 10,000 at a loss. So that question, I know Councilor Mejia and I had talked last term about the amount of money we spend per student, which at that point was the most in the country for an urban school district, and the return on investment. So I definitely will have questions directed to, this increase, even though we have less students, where is the money going? Because we're not seeing that we are making improvements, especially in the glaring ones that were part of the MOU about inclusion, transportation, reading levels, graduation levels, attendance. So all of those will be good to have information on. Also, we know that ESSER funding, you mentioned it, that we have to spend it soon or we lose it. And we see this in lots of departments that we approve for a certain amount of money and maybe it will increase particular positions in different departments, but then when they come back, they tell us, thank you for that funding, but we weren't even able to fill it. So one thing I did see is that specific positions that were funded under ESSER are going to be eliminated, and some of them were never even filled. So I'd like to know specifically, because I see that 339 staff members will be eliminated, and I'd like to know exactly what positions they were, because obviously the school department thought that the positions they created with that ESSER funding would have been very effective to help deliver instruction to our students. So the actual positions that we will no longer see in the next school year is important to have that list. But if we have another round, I can go around and have my other colleagues, and just be clear that we can continue to send questions to you, the ones we do want to make sure BPS has in advance of the official budget hearing.
Yes, you can
Okay,
definitely
awesome.
submit them in writing.
Okay, thank you.
All right. Council Weber, the floor is yours.
Thank you. This being my first, this is a working session, not a hearing. Hopefully, I don't know what the ground rules are, but my sense is this is a very, sort of we've been patching things up with the school budget with Band-Aids for years, and this is going to represent the start of like some major structural changes. We talked about, I'm sure everyone's heard about schools closing, dozens of schools closing, who knows, that with ESSER funds leaving and loss of federal funds, there's going to be some big changes coming, and that I think this is a great thing that we're doing because we want to be involved, and I think there's, we're going to see, we want to be a part of this process. So Councilor Pepin's question about the weighted, what is it called, the weighted
Student funding.
student funding. So my understanding is they've been using weighted student funding, and now they're not going to use weighted student funding. So my question is, please explain what the new formula is, and maybe that's what you're getting at. So I'd certainly want to know that. I had questions about, with enrollment declining, what are they doing things to slow the decline at certain schools? How are they approaching that enrollment decline with each school? And I think that will maybe be answered by our what's the formula question. I had questions about, I think they have reading specialists and reading interventionists, which can be very effective at helping kids read up to grade level. What the numbers are now, what they project the numbers of reading interventionists / specialists are going to be next year. I had a question about how many classrooms they're consolidating and where, because I think that some of the budget cuts are allotted to where they're consolidating classrooms, and how that weighs into the formula, but also where that's happening. And let me think here. So yeah, I guess if we're going to go around again, that's kind of what I was thinking about. Can I add more questions?
Yeah, we'll do another
later?
round. Yeah.
Thank you, Chair.
All right. Thank you. Council Braden, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Not Madam Chair. Beg your pardon, it's early.
It's all right.
I haven't had enough coffee yet.
It's fine.
Old habits die hard. Yes, I have a whole lot of questions, but let's start. I had a question about out-of-district placements. I'd love a breakdown on the number of students who are on out-of-district placements and a breakdown by their needs. Are they visually impaired, hearing impaired, behavioural autism spectrum, their IEP? It doesn't have to identify individual students, but just the number of students on out-of-district placements and the amount of broken down by where they go and how much money it costs, including a breakdown on transportation costs. And also then I'd love a breakdown of the Horace Mann is a regional school for the deaf and serves students from all over, about 22 different school districts. I'd like a better understanding of how much revenue that school brings in from out of district. That's the Horace Mann and the special education question. I'd also like, and keeping on special education, the Boston Public Schools is a pass-through for or services for students who are not BPS, who are special needs students who need support. I'd like a breakdown on the number of students that they serve that are outside of the BPS, but that they are responsible for providing their special education supports like physical therapy, speech therapy, OT, other special services. I'd like a breakdown of the numbers and the pass-through and how we're keeping track of that. It seems like the question with the new inclusion plan that we're going to be working with our ELL students in the same classroom as special ed classroom and general ed all in the same space, yet there's no allocation for increased funds for English language learners in the budget. Doesn't seem to be. So I'd like to know specifically how we are going to support our English language learners in this new inclusion model that has been proposed for this going forward. And then the other, I have a lot more questions. One more for this round. Paid administrative leave. I was looking at our request for information last year. We had paid administrative leave. I'd like a breakdown of the paid administrative leave costs. We had numbers for FY20 through part of 23. I'd like an update on the paid administrative leave and the costs of paid administrative leave, how many staff are still on paid administrative leave and how many cases are resolved. And then partnerships. I really feel that partnerships is, we leave a lot of resources on the table because we don't have an adequate structure to work in partnership with all of the different institutions in the City of Boston. So I'd like an understanding of how many staff are dedicated to working on developing partnerships with all of the institutions and resources that we have in the City of Boston, businesses and institutions. And I think I'll stop there for now. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Braden. Councilor Coletta?
Thank you so much, Chair. Thank you for your leadership in convening this conversation very early. I appreciate my colleagues' questions already. I do have a long list, which I intend to send to you via email, but I'll just go through quickly. of what I'd like to see. My team and I are going through Superintendent Skipper's budget, which is down almost 5% from last year, which is the first time that we've seen a decrease. And this is due primarily, of course, people know this, due to ESSER funds. And so I want to understand how that will impact school environments and then the human impact on that as well. So my first questions are related to just savings and actual year-to-date spending. So I'd like to figure out what that is, the actual to-date FY24 spending, any savings realized by department within BPS for FY24, specifically on vacancy savings, where those savings will be allocated and sent to. Any changes to external funds. So we did receive a document outlining it, but to your point earlier, Chair, we don't understand the year-to-year change. So I would like to get something that says what the FY24 was, maybe FY23 if those data points are available, specifically for external funds. Switching to capital projects, I would like to see multi-year capital projects or investments in District 1, although I think we should see them per every single district. A timeline of when they intend to be funded. Facilities upgrades, we all know that it starts with a study, then design, then planning, and then construction. I would like a full breakdown of what's happening in my district. I'm calling out for the administration and BPS if they're listening, the O'Donnell School Playground, the Edwards School renovations, and the East Boston expansion utilizing the surplus property on Paris Street. Switching to personnel information, I'd like a 5-year analysis of full-time employees, all full-time employees in central office. There was a decrease in central office funding, and I believe just holistically, this budget decreases 393 positions. So I'd like to understand not just how many people we are losing in central office, but who we are losing and what those positions were. I'd also like to understand the holistic family supports networks in my district and maybe citywide. So this is family liaisons, their supervisors, social workers. Katie's Closet is a huge deal in my community and in my schools. They provide clothing for folks who have gone through fires or just don't have a lot. And so I'd like to understand where Katie's Closet is funded and how much we are funding them. And then last but not least, looking at contracts. So overview of current contracts, breakdown of contracts, any barriers to contractor diversity, and then a narrative on anything over, I would say, $100,000. So I know that that's a lot. I will follow up via email, but those are all of my call-outs and questions. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you, Council Coletta. Council Flynn, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Some of my questions or comments were already discussed by my colleagues, but thank you, Chair, for chairing this important meeting. Some of the issues I would like to get answers on are the food access program for BPS families, and specifically, how are we ensuring that our BHA students, that our students that live in BHA are getting the food access that they need and they deserve. I'd like to get an update on any infrastructure challenges in every school, in every BPS building, regardless of how small this infrastructure challenge might be, in the short-term and long-term goals in addressing that and solving that problem. I would also like to get a rundown on language and communication access support for immigrants that have recently arrived into Boston, but also immigrant families such as I have in my district, including a large number of Chinese families that language and communication access support is critical. I know the important role the junior ROTC program plays in the city. I'd like to get a short-term and long-term plan on that program. I know it's very successful in many schools across the city, and I'm looking to hear about how we're going to properly fund this. Probably one of the most diverse groups of students you possibly could see, and they're doing tremendous work. I just want to make sure we have the resources to support them. I'm also looking to get some information on safety and security in our schools and what the policy is in terms of keeping our schools safe, but also keeping our schools healthy as well, and that would include getting information on any HVAC system that is not working properly and any issues relating to the drinking water fountains. I'm also concerned about after-school activities and sports, especially as it relates to getting our students there by bus or by van, ensuring that we have the proper funds to get our students to where they need to go. Someone also mentioned and ELL is also an important issue. Let me just finish up with a couple more, I guess. One issue that I would like to focus on going forward is the outreach and the support we are getting from colleges and universities, the support they're providing our BPS students, and including the pilot program as well. One of my colleagues mentions getting a list of all BPS personnel. I'd also like to get a list of BPS. I'd like to get an org chart, especially for senior managers at BPS. I think that would be helpful. I'd also like to get the short-term plans goals and long-term plans goals for the O'Brien School in Madison Park. And finally, I know Councilor Braden mentioned the Horace Mann School. I know that's a critical, important school in Boston. It serves so many students across the city. I would also like to get some more information on how we're supporting our students that are hard of hearing and what services, after-school programs are we providing them. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Councilor Flynn. Councilor Louis Jen, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, for holding this hearing. I think it's really prudent of us to be having this hearing before we even hear from BPS so that we could get our questions on the record. So thank you again, Mr. Chair, for holding this. I have some questions. Again, some of my colleagues have mentioned them. I guess I'll start with one of the questions that I want to elevate that Councilor Braden talked about, which is our students with IEPs, our Equitable Services Department in Boston Public Schools, really trying to understand the work that we're doing there to ensure that our students with IEPs and those placed in private schools, that we understand the costs involved and the work that we're doing around equitable services. So would love to get just a financial rundown of that program and how equitable services within BPS is working. As we move away from the weighted student formula, this is a conversation that we've been looking to change it since 2021. What work has been done with, and Mr. Chair, I'm happy to also send you these questions electronically as well, but just for the record so that you have them. What work has been done with the Reimagining School Funding Initiative, which was also incorporating the changing from the weighted student funding. How will the fiscal year 2025 budget benefit from the Reimagining School Funding Initiative? What partners has BPS been working with as we look at alternative financing models? Can BPS provide examples of how similar funding models have been implemented successfully in other districts or regions? With respect to transitioning from ESSER funding, what's not clear in the planning beyond ESSER is how continued investments, be it through new operating investments or offsets in the current budget, how those investments compare to the current program and supports. Basically, how many programs will be losing and how many people will be losing. For me, this is a question that is of particular importance as we look at the supports, the social and emotional supports that we provide for our young people. I know that we've been able to do things like increase the number of slave classroom students with limited or interrupted formal education and social workers for that program, but in accounting of our social workers, family liaisons, and our guidance counselors, because I think we transit from ESSER funding to a soft landing. How long is that runway for the soft landing? and what programs will terminate. So just an accounting too of where things stand for the soft landing funds. How will the district evaluate the effectiveness of ESSER-funded initiatives to determine what's continuing, what's discontinuing, and what's being modified, and what measures are being taken to ensure transparency and stakeholder engagement in decisions related to budget adjustments post-ESSER? Because a lot of schools from West Roxbury to East Boston have been able to put programming in place as a result of ESSER funding, and these are school communities that have wrapped their arms around the programming and staff support that they've been able to gain. So just trying to make sure that we have a good understanding of that. And then we are moving towards an inclusion model, which has some benefits, and we've seen some challenges with the English Language Learners Task Force and their feelings about some of the potential harms of going to a full inclusion model. So some questions that I have around that are all of our schools physically equipped with the necessary facilities to support full inclusion, such as accessible classrooms and inclusive learning materials? What are the anticipated challenges in implementing full inclusion across all schools? And what are strategies in place to address these challenges? And then with respect to enrollment, just questions around what numbers we use for the financial models for BPS, whether we're using enrollment projections or actual numbers for funding schools, how accurate these projections have been, and how can we be more realistic about these projections, given, again, the earlier calls in my questioning for transparency around the school funding. And then just what are the long-term projections for enrollment? I know that those are really often really hard to make, especially as we see new students arriving to our schools every day. But if we could get a sense of the projections, I think that will help us as we review the school budget. Yeah, those are my questions for now. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Councilor Louis-Jen. Councilor Santana?
So a lot of my questions, thank you, Mr. Chair, for hosting this working session. A lot of my questions have been answered, and now also my team and I will submit written questions. But I think, like Councilor Flynn, I think mentioned, I think a couple of the questions that I have are related to the migrant crisis that we're having going on, and kind of seeing what BPS is going to do in terms of projecting that over the next several years. And like Councilor Breeden also mentioned, the inclusion model and kind of the funding that goes through for our English language learners that's going there. And then finally, I also want to just have a breakdown on safety in our schools, police presence in our schools, and kind of what policies are being implemented. Are there policies that are district-wide, city-wide, or are we taking a school by school kind of approach? And we'll kind of like to have a breakdown on that. The other thing I want to have a breakdown on just generally any resources that are being specifically allocated for BHA residents and families directly from for BPS. So again, I will submit these questions via email written down, but those are my questions for now. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Santana. Councilor Durkin, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much for hosting this hearing. This is obviously my first budget cycle, so excited to dig in here. Have had a couple meetings with BPS already, and I'm grateful to the superintendent for, as I joined the council, being willing to meet with me and explain more about her role, and obviously just had my BPS meeting around the budget, so I asked some of my questions there. But in order to read them into the record, I'll do so here. What will be the process for inclusion rollout in schools with a history of prioritization of academic rigor, in the sense of making sure that as we try to move towards a model where all BPS schools are excellent, ensuring that a lot of the constituents in my district are really seeking for their kids to go to the best possible Boston public schools, or or other independent schools. And so just curious about sort of how BPS thinks about that. And then what supports will be in place for facility changes while schools are being remodeled? What partnerships for mental health supports have proven effective? And will those evaluations of those programs be provided to the public? Again, as I stressed, we're all looking to see BPS and all of our schools be excellent. And as we move away from an angle of, does my kid get into an exam school or do they go somewhere else? And that's particularly, of interest to folks in my district. Will BPS seek to support gifted populations of youth with increased academic rigor and greater challenges in other Boston public schools other than exam schools? And then what measures will we use to hold school leaders accountable for implementing changes, and how will their successes be measured in a place to guide their leadership? So I'll just say I know we're moving towards an inclusion model, and I think that's really helpful, but obviously a lot of questions as we transition and we make changes, so I really appreciate my colleagues and all of their questions. I did have the opportunity, and I wanted to flag this for some of my colleagues, I did have an opportunity to attend the elementary school workshop for the Green New Deal for Boston Public Schools, which was held at the BPL library a couple weeks ago. I know they're happening in different, they have different days for different areas of Boston, so that was the one that was most germane to my district, but would really encourage my colleagues to join some of these workshops. I learned so much about how BPS is thinking about whether to remodel, whether to close, and sort of the, what they're looking at as a rubric for how to make decisions about public facilities. So, and it was really great. I actually met a lot of constituents who have students in the Boston Public Schools who were there to participate in the workshop. So just wanted to encourage my colleagues to participate in those because it was really helpful for me. I know Councillor Clutta mentioned this, but the realization that so many jobs had been unfilled for so many years, and that was part of what the budget differences this year. I'd be curious to know what those jobs were, and and just highlight and add myself to that same question of just curious what those jobs are, and and if they were duplicative, and if there's a need for any of those jobs to return. And I am really excited to see a move away from the weighted formula, which I know has capped some of the excellence that, capped us at a certain level of, funding. So I really appreciate those. I will be reviewing the school allocations and for all the schools in my district, which I only have one K through 8, but some high schools and a couple of high schools in my district as well. So I'll be reviewing those, and if I have any additional questions, I'll add them and send them your way. Chair, thank you so much.
Thank you, Councilor Durkin. I'm just going to submit my questions on the record. A few of them have been asked, but the two that haven't so far is the Title I funds. There's a cliff on funding on Title I dependent upon 35% of students. And that number won't be finalized until August by DESE. But we're still using that as part of this new funding formula. What happens if a school goes above or below that mark in August? Will funding change right before the school year begins? And then also, I would like to have a racial equity report on a school-by-school basis for what effect the cuts will have on teacher and staff diversity. We'll go another round for questions. If you have questions, please light up your mic. Councilor Pepin.
Thank you, Councilor Worrell. I do have a few more questions that I would like to put on the record. And the first one is, our office, alongside Councilor Weber's office, has gotten about dozens of concerns about the budget cuts to schools, in specific the Linden School. And there's a lot of questions from parents out there. Will the new formula replenish those funds, or are the schools completely losing those funds? My next question is, I was taking a look at the breakdown of the budget, and one of the numbers that stood out to me was the funding for the 6th to 8th grade sports after-school programming. It looked very low, and I wanted to know if BPS is considering to expand that, or what's the long-term plan for after-school sports, because it's something that I want to see happen in my district specific, but I know every parent across the city would like to see more funding for after-school sports. My next question is, can I get an update on the HVAC system funding for each school in my district and the expected timeline of completion? I'm asking this specifically in regards to the Chittick School in Hyde Park, which I know the parents are very concerned with their quality of air in that school. And my last question is, in my district is home to the Matahan School, which is one of the only dual language schools in the city which provide services in Haitian Creole. And with our Haitian migrants increasing, I would love to see more investment into that school. So I would love to know, what is BPS long-term plan for the Matahan School dual language program?
Thank you, Council Pepin. Council Murphy?
So we have a 4.7% increase to the budget, which includes an $81 million investment from the city. I have a couple questions on that $81 million. The first is, how much has the city given to the BPS budget over the last 10 years to add to their general and external funds? And specific to this $81 million, I know 17 million of that is being spent on efficiencies in central office, which is kind of vague. So I would like a breakdown of exactly where that 81 million is going, so we can see, if it's replacing the loss of ESSER funds or if it's spending money in a different area would be important. Thank you for uplifting what I think anyone who has been paying attention the last 2 years to my advocacy with the BPS budget to the athletics. I will continue. It's the reason the first and second year I voted against the overall budget. Just to be clear, we're down, unfortunately, to 45,742 students. That comes out to $37,165 we spend per student. And we were only spending $72. We got an increase to $96 last year, but it was very clear. They told us that that increase was temporary because it was ESSER funding, which we know now will be gone. So what is the exact dollar amount? Because right now we only spend 0.0019% of the overall budget per student on athletics. And we know that arts, athletics, before and after school programming for many ties directly into the social emotional wellness, graduation rates, increased reading performance. All of the things we're also advocating for is very important. And we know that we continue to have a chronic absenteeism. It's above 40%, which means that over 20,000 students each day are absent from school every day. Some high schools, like the McKinley, is as high as 80%. We have a 3 teachers to 1 student ratio on any given day at a school like the McKinley. I know it has a new name. Sorry, we've renamed it. But investments in what are we doing about that? And would like specific questions. I know we're 2-3 years now out of COVID, and there was a lot of Chromebooks and conversations about health safety, obviously, but I think we're far enough away from the chronic absenteeism that was somewhat blamed on COVID, but we knew, the headline I read last year came from 2013, so it's been an issue we've had in the system forever. And I know, talking to other departments in the DA's office, that a lot of our children who are suffering, who are not in school at all, do we have an exact count of who never returned and where are those students now? Because we know that many students never returned back to the classroom, not just sporadic attendance, which we know has to be addressed also. And I'm happy that the statewide, the governor and the education department is taking on that as a statewide initiative also, but we know here in Boston we have to definitely uplift that. And that's something I want to make sure that we're investing money and being able to not just track where these children are, but also how do we adjust. And I know going away from the weighted funding formula is a conversation we will have, but one concern I do have is that a school that's, to capacity, maybe over capacity, stretched thin with, long waiting lists, is going to get the same funding as a high school like Brighton High, who may have less students than the Kilmer, right? So to make sure that we're putting, the reason behind the weighted formula was that for every student, you'd get a dollar amount, and where buildings had more students, we obviously needed more funding. So we have to just look closely at making sure that it is equitable across the board, but that schools that are bustling, that we want all of them to be, right? I would hope that that number of 45,000 is above 50 before I leave this chamber, right? That we're able to increase, and the only way we're going to be able to do that is if we can drive families and students back, and that's around issues. Thank you, Councilor Santini, you mentioned about the safety, the athletics, the quality of education is also obviously important, but it's as important that we have, equitable sports teams, art classes, facilities that, matter to everyone. So those are some more of the questions I will formally submit, but want to make sure that that's on the record.
Thank you, Councilor Murphy. Councilor Weber?
Thank you. Just a couple questions. Thank you to Councilor Pepin again for highlighting the Linden. My question goes to that. Schools like the Linden and the Beethoven, what steps has BPS taken to minimize the impact of loss of ESSER funds on those schools, which seem to have much larger cuts this year as opposed to other schools? That's one question. Another is on the facilities. I think I know what the answer is going to be, but what schools are at risk to be closed? What I've been told is that they don't know, and that they're going to give a year, advance notice. And people buy houses, they sign leases, they think their kid is going to go to school, and then, I think we need as much warning as possible for school closures, and I just want to press for that. And lastly, on busing, what steps does BPS take to make sure that that we're using busing efficiently? There's anecdotal stories of buses with 2 kids on them, and so I just don't know what planning goes into that, and whether there is money that we can save on busing that we're not, because I don't know what their analysis is. So thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councilor Weber. Councilor Braden?
Thank you. Where was I? I'd also like a breakdown of the capital expenditures for every school in District 9. I'm curious, because the schedule I'm looking at is really, it just looks like we're going to get water fountains. I'm sure there's other things that we need in District 9, like lighting in the hallways in the high school would be a good start. I'd really like to get a breakdown on our progress on renovating the bathrooms across the district, especially because that is always the big issue that everyone wants to talk about when it comes to capital improvements and facilities. I'd like to see a capital plan for FY23 to FY28, like exactly what is the plan. Even if it's a preliminary sort of framework of what we, because all of our MSBA funds, they won't give you money if there's a plan to close the school within the next 7 years. So we need to have some idea about what we're talking about here. I'd really like to get a comparable cost schedule for the relocation of the O'Brien, and I'd like information on the options that were looked at with a cost attached to what renovations. What exactly would be the cost renovations of the West Roxbury campus? The West Roxbury campus needed significant improvements in the last 10 to 15 years, And in 2016, the estimate for repair was 52 million in 2016. I think a realistic cost right now is probably closer to 150 to 200 million, given the cost of supplies and labour and supply chain issues. So I'd like to get they're talking about moving the O'Brien out to West Roxbury. What's it going to cost to repair the building? I'd also like to look at the cost of other options, like expanding the O'Brien, which is probably not the option that is reasonable, because the Madison Park needs space. But have they looked at Timilty and Dearborn, the Timilty and the Dearborn STEM High School, to see and the cost of relocating the O'Brien into that space? Those spaces. I'm interested, like Councillor Webber earlier, on the reading specialists. I'd like to know the number of reading specialists we have, what grades they're working with. I'm particularly interested in those students who end up going to high school at 6th and 7th grade and are still got significant reading challenges. What resources are we offering to those students to help in terms of reading specialists to help them improve their reading? Boston has 73,000 school-age students, and we have 47,000 of them in BPS. I'd like to understand what we're doing to attract and retain our BPS students to the system. And we are in a competitive market for students, and what are we doing about it? Let's see, capital expenditures. I also want to elevate the question that Councillor Murphy raised about BPS athletics, allocation per student, and also information about adaptive phys ed for our students with disabilities. I would really like to get an independent projection of enrolment. Like, we have no idea what our enrolment's going to look like, and we can't plan. We talk about a capital plan. We have to have realistic numbers to work off, so that we can, work off some real numbers. I'd like a breakdown of no-bid contracts. And then I'd like some more information on behavioural supports for our students with emotional impairments. How many behavioural specialists we have, and how are they assigned? I think we already touched on the issue about truancy and students who dropped out of school during COVID. Our alternative high schools, for more information on alternative high schools, and what models, what hours do they work? Do they cater for our working students? I know many of our students are working 20, 30 hours a week to help support their families. What alternative models do we have to support them? And then also opportunities for them to get their high school diploma, or to get access to technical education for those young people who had to drop out during COVID. They're like a lost generation. And then also, I'd like a breakdown on outside consultants, professional services, and what sort of money we're spending on hiring consultants, lawyers, accountants, whomever. And the other question I have is, does the city auditor audit the school budget? And if so, could we have access to a summary of the city auditor's report on Boston's public schools? Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Braden. Councillor Flynn, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And again, my colleagues were asking excellent questions, and I want to thank them for their outstanding preparation for this hearing. One of the issues I'd like to get an update on is the status of the Carter School. I know the renovation, the new school is going forward, but I just want to get some background information, especially on the therapeutic swimming pool to help students with disabilities. I also want to see if I can get information on social workers and school nurses that speak English, but speak other languages as well, especially Cantonese and Spanish and other languages. But in my district, Cantonese is spoken as well as Spanish. But I want to ensure that social workers and nurses, that we're also doing our due diligence to hire nurses and social workers that speak other languages. The other issue I do want to continue to focus on, and again, it's been mentioned, but the O'Brien School has been mentioned several times, but is there an opportunity, especially long-term, to build a state-of-the-art, brand-new O'Brien School in the Black community of Boston, whether that's Dorchester, whether that's in Roxbury, especially so we're able to partner with some of the colleges and universities that are in and around that neighborhood. And if the O'Brien School does go to West Roxbury, what impact would it have on some of the partnerships that are already developed? And how would students get from West Roxbury to a internship at, one of these colleges off of Huntington Avenue or one of these biotech companies? So I'd like to see if we're able to do a study about the impact a potential move would have on students and their after-school internships, their after-school follow-up educational programs. But my main point is, are we able to have a serious conversation about building a state-of-the-art O'Brien School, which I would like us to do in either Dorchester or Roxbury? At this time, Mr. Chair, I have no further questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Flynn. Councilor Coletta, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Chair, and I know that I said I didn't have any more questions, but I just have two quick things, and then unfortunately I have to run. But I forgot to call out when discussing facilities timelines and construction timeline in my district, the acquisition of, I think it's 1150 Saratoga Street, for a new facility in my district. I'd love details on that, how much that cost, and what the projected retrofits are for making it either an elementary school or a middle school or an expansion of the high school. And then the last point that I'd like to make is just understanding projected costs for a pilot program for climate science and an environmental justice curriculum. That's something that we're pushing out, and so would love to understand that. And just generally, I know that they'll talk about it, but what the added benefits have been for electrifying our facilities and some of the green retrofits that we've put out there. And something in my district that I'm really worried about are schools that are in the flood zone, particularly the Umana. They just repaved the parking lot, so we're going to have to figure out what green infrastructure looks like on some of these properties, and this is a great opportunity for BPS to be the model in what we can do moving forward on city streets. So those are my last two, and I'm so sorry that I have to run, but thank you for convening this.
Thank you, Councilor Coletta. Councilor Louis-Jen, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I just, my question is, I think one of my colleagues asked a question that sort of had me thinking if it, just to clearly state sort of like the general facilities update, the master plan, that it is really important as we try to think about the budget and think about the planning for the future of our schools. I know that that needs to be, I think, front and center in the conversation. And as well, I wanted to elevate something that, a school that's in your district, the home school, in Dorchester, great conversations about how further parent engagement and what BPS is doing to really bring our parents into the fold in our schools and what resources we are providing for that. I think a lot of my colleagues have asked really great questions, and I think this is a really great way for us to get ahead of the delays sometimes back and forth when you ask questions and then it takes a long time for us to get answers. But if they come prepared to talk about that, starting, I think, with the master plan, the facilities update, that would be helpful. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you, Council Louis Jen. Council Durkin?
Thank you so much. I just wanted to flag that when I was at the facilities hearing, I had got the chance to speak with the Boston Schools Committee Chair, Jerry Robinson, who was at my table, and she really described a willingness and interest in collaborating with the Boston City Council, and just, you know, obviously they run their own process and are the governing body for BPS. So I'm planning to attend. They have virtual budget hearings. The first one's on February 15th at 5 p.m., which is focused on school budgets. They're doing one on Monday, March 4th at 5 p.m., focused on central budget, and then Wednesday, March 20th, 5 p.m., their final budget hearing. And then their committee meeting will be February 28th at 5 p.m. I think it's so important that that we also, as we're engaging in the process on our end and for our districts and for the city of Boston, that, you know, as we're doing so, we are aligning ourselves, you know, since they're the ones really making a final call on the school budget, and making sure we know the questions are being asked in that public forum. So I'm planning to either attend or have a staff member attend those. So just wanted to encourage my colleagues to do the same if you're interested in sort of what's going on the other side.
Yes, thank you, Council Durkin, for that. And yes, to reiterate that schedule for the school committee, Wednesday, February 28th, virtual, 5 p.m. Monday, the 4th, Monday, March 4th, FY25 budget hearing, focus on central budget. And then Thursday, March 20th, virtual, 5 p.m., FY25 budget hearing. And then on Thursday, March 27th, FY25 budget vote, which is virtual at 5 p.m. And we do plan on working closely with the school committee on making sure that our advocacy is felt at those hearings. Any other counselor for any other questions? Council Braden?
It doesn't seem that there's a budget for collective bargaining. I'd like some information on that. And I'd like a breakdown, you know, central administration, an org chart for the central administration and the budget breakdown by department. And then also for the superintendent's office, an org chart and a budget breakdown by department as well within the superintendent's office. Just to get a better understanding of the infrastructure within the school department. And there was one other question I'd like to, you know, I don't know if I've asked this, but the whole issue around family liaisons. You know, I think that they're a critical piece of our school community to help bridge and engage with working families who are working 2 jobs in and out of school. Just a number of school family liaisons by school, and then their language skills as well. What particular languages we're covering, depending on the neighbourhood. It would be, you know, is it Cape Verdean Creole or Haitian Creole, or is it Spanish, or whatever. But it'd be good to know what the liaisons are doing. I think that's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Council Braden. Council Weber?
I apologize. Just one last thing. I just had a question about music teachers, music programs. What the allocation was for music across the district, and you know, where those funds were going.
Thank you. And then I'll add a few more questions to the record. The kindergarten line item changes, was the difference all reallocated to the special education line item? And then if we could get a breakdown on how many dual certified teachers there are at BPS as we, you know, move to inclusion. I think this would be important. And to clarify on the submitting of questions. If we could submit all questions to central staff, Shane, that'll be helpful. And then if we could do it by the end of, I'll say the beginning of next week. I know Monday's a holiday, so Tuesday, so we could give BPS ample time to respond back to our questions. before our March 14th working session with BPS. Councilor Murphy?
As a teacher in BPS and a special ed teacher, I do just want to advocate the last thing you said. I do hope that as we push for this inclusion model to expand over more, if not all of our schools, that the dual certification puts the burden on a teacher who has. Many times teachers don't share it because they know they're then going to have to do the job of 2 teachers. So we'll be advocating to make sure that that is not the case for our staff. Many schools that are taking on inclusion have to do the role of the special ed teacher and the general ed teacher, which isn't the case at some of the more successful, like the Mary Lyons and other inclusion schools that first rolled out. The system now states that they can't afford that same model, which I know isn't true. So that will be part of the conversation I'll be interested in going forward. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, thank you to my colleagues for being here today, for your thoughtful questions, and looking to working with you on this process. And with that said, this committee meeting is adjourned.